Hello, everybody. Welcome to our storytelling time. Before we start with the story, we want to ask if anybody needs a translation to your own language. If yes, you can either raise your hand.
Chaya raised her hand.
Chaya, are you waving or do you need translation?
Waving.
Okay, she's waving. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, I think we can start.
All right. Well, hello, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I brought you a story, a Shabbat story, which is also connected to something coming up on Monday, which is a small Jewish holiday, which is called Tu B'Av, and it's basically the Jewish Valentine's Day, the Jewish Day of Love. So I brought a Shabbat story, which is also a love story. So I hope you will enjoy it. It's called A Riddle and a Kiss. Once upon a time, in the city of Seville, in Spain, there was a gardener who had 3 beautiful daughters. Their names were Alicia, Esther, and Rina. Every day, they cared for the plants in the garden. The garden had a lemon tree, roses, almond trees, and all manner of herbs. The most beautiful herb of all was the basil plant. Each day, the girls took their turn tending to the basil and the flowers and the trees. Now, at the same time, the son of a famous family of Seville, Don Isaco by name, was also living in the same town. In later years, he would become a noble and would have all his father's estate. But now, he still spent his time hunting, fishing, and amusing himself like all young nobles did. Don Isaco loved riddles. He was quite smart, clever, and loved to test people by asking them questions that they could never hope to answer. He considered himself to be superior in smartness and worldly knowledge to any of the inhabitants of Seville. One day, he went for a walk through the streets and plazas, and coming to the outskirts of the city, he was drawn by the lovely scent of almond branches and lemon trees. Well, of course, it was the home of the gardener. As he came closer to the house, to the garden, he saw Alicia, the eldest daughter. He drew near, and when she looked up, he thought of a riddle, and he said, "Young maiden who tends to the garden walk, how many leaves on the basil plant's stalk?" Alicia was surprised. As soon as he saw the young noble and heard his words, she blushed and ran into the house because she didn't know the answer. He was very proud of himself and whistled and walked away. The next day he returned and found Esther, the middle daughter, tending the garden. He thought to himself, "Okay, I'll try my riddle on this one." When she heard his words, she also blushed and ran into her father's house. The young noble felt really pleased with himself. And the next day he returned to the garden. He was really beginning to enjoy himself immensely. This time, Rina, the youngest daughter, was tending the flowers and the herbs. He leaned over the gate as she worked, and he repeated the question, "Young maiden who tends to the garden walk, how many leaves on the basil plant's stalk?" But Rina was not taken aback. She stood up, looked at the young man with his velvet cloak and leather boots, and without a pause, she replied, "I'll give your answer if your first reply. How many stars fill the night sky?" For the first time in his life, the young man was flustered. Someone answered him back. Since he had no answer for her now, he turned on his heels and went back to his castle to plot his revenge. The next day was Friday. Early in the morning, Don Isacco threw a cloak over his head, picked out the finest fish in the kitchen. He wrapped in his cloth and put the fish into a basket. Then he made his way to the gardener's house. Once again, Rina was in the garden. He stopped by and called out in the voice of a street peddler, "Fresh fish for Shabbat. Come, buy a tasty fish for your Shabbat table." Rina walked to the gate. She did not recognize the noble youth, but she thought it would be really nice to have a nice, fine fish for Shabbat. "How much for the fish?" she asked. "I'll run to the house and pay you gladly, because in our house, it is really a joy to celebrate Shabbat with a festive big meal." Don Isacco spoke in a disguised voice and said, "Since this is no ordinary fish, no ordinary money will do. If you want this fish for your Shabbat meal, you must pay me not with money, but with kisses." Rina stepped back in shock. Then she thought about what a lovely meal she could prepare for her family, and looking around to make sure that nobody else was there, she said, "Very well," and offered her cheek. The noble kissed her enough times for her to be worthy of such a fine Shabbat gift. Rina grabbed her prize and ran into the house. Don Isacco walked away, chuckling to himself. Some days later, he returned to the garden to find Rina. Once again, he called out his favorite riddle. "Young maiden who tends to the garden walk, how many leaves on the basil plant's stalk?" Without batting an eye, she replied, "I'll give you your answer if you first reply, how many stars fill the night sky?" But now, Don Isacco replied in the peddler's voice, "I will answer, but tell me first, if you wish, how many kisses did you give me for a Shabbat fish?" Rina was mortified. She realized that it was he who had tricked her and disguised himself as the peddler. This young noble had mocked her honor. She ran into the house and cried. And Don Isacco went back to his palace, was very happy with himself. For many days, Rina could not be comforted. Her sisters brought her chocolate. Her father brought her books, but nothing could ease her spirits. In the end, however, she would not let herself be outwitted. She dried her tears and came up with a plan. First, she borrowed a donkey from a neighbor. Then she made a black cloth for herself that covered her up. And when all the preparations were complete, she waited until the middle of the night and then made her way on secret paths to the castle of young Don Isacco. She left her donkey tied up in the garden and quietly found her way into the young man's bedroom. Holding a candle and carrying a staff, she knocked 3 times on the floor. Tick, tick. Don Isacco woke with a start and saw before him this black figure draped in shadows. "I am the angel of death," said the figure. "Your days on earth are over. Now you must come with me." The young noble was terrified. "But I'm still a young man," he said. "Surely it is not time for me to die yet." The figure spoke again. "There is one way for some mortals to extend their life, but only if you are brave." "I'll do anything," said Don Isacco. "If you wish to live, you must come out to the garden secretly where nobody can see you." So the noble followed her down the staircase and outside. As soon as they reached the garden wall, Rina said in a hoarse whisper, "If you wish to live, you must show your humility by kissing this donkey on the nose." one time for each year you wish to live. Don Isacco was even more horrified. He, the noble Don Isacco, son of the great family of Seville, kiss a donkey? But since it was in the dark of the night, he bent down and kissed the donkey on the nose. He did so many times in order to have a long, long life. Now be off, said Rina, and waved her staff. The youth returned to his room and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The next day, feeling in a lively mood, he decided to go back to the gardener's house once more. He called his servants to come along, and when he arrived, he knocked on the gate and began to speak. Young maiden who tends to the garden walk, how many leaves on the basil plant's stalk? Without hesitating, she replied, I'll give you your answer if you first reply. How many stars fill the night sky? So he said, I will answer, but tell me first, if you wish, how many kisses did you give me for a Shabbat fish? He looked around, gloating, but this time Rina did not run away. Instead, she looked at the noble and spoke in the voice that she had used in her disguise. True, I paid for fish with kisses like a fool, but how many times at midnight did you kiss a mew? Before she could finish her riddle, however, Don Isacco threw his sword on the ground and said, Very well, you have won the game. I have finally met my match. There is someone in the city of Seville as smart as I am. The courtiers, his servants, looked very surprised, but Rina and Don Isacco understood each other very well. He did not want anyone to hear the last word of the rhyme or discover how she had tricked him. And she, for her part, was satisfied. Her revenge was complete. Now she could look the young noble in the eye without shame. The courtiers dispersed, but the young noble realized that he would never meet a maiden as intriguing as Rina. Some days later, he appeared at the garden again, not with a riddle, but with a proposal of marriage. And so it was that Rina, the youngest daughter of the gardener of Seville, married into the noble family of Don Isacco. They lived happily together for many years, often telling stories and riddles to each other and to their children. And even today, their descendants say this rhyme, a special family tradition at the very end of the Friday night meal. Almonds and honey are sweets not to miss, but none is as sweet as a Shabbat kiss. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Zsuzsa, so much for sharing this story with us. Before we say goodbye to you and wish you Shabbat Shalom one more time, we wanted to do a little candle lighting. Now it's only 5:15, at least in this part of Europe, and Shabbat comes in about 3 hours, so you don't have to light your candles now. I'm just going to do it now and show it for everyone. So that you can know how to do it later on at home for yourselves. So we usually light 2 Shabbat candles. Tradition says that we light 2 because in the Torah we have a commandment to keep Shabbat and remember Shabbat, and each of the candles represent one of these 2 things. So the tradition is to usually light 2 candles. But there is another tradition that says that you can also light a candle for every member of your household. So you can light as many candles as there are people in your family. The tradition also says that women are the ones who light the candles, the Shabbat candles, that it's a mitzvah for women. But if there are no women in your house, men can do that as well. Even if there are women in your house, you can do that as well. I'm going to light them now, as I said, just kind of for us to enter Shabbat together, but feel free to do it in your own homes in about 2.5 hours when Shabbat actually comes near. Okay, I'm gonna lower my screen so that you actually see what I'm doing. Do you see the candles? So we first lighted the candles. We then wave 3 times over the candles. And then we close our eyes and we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ladlik ner shel Shabbat. Then we open the eyes and we look at the candles that we lit. And we say, Shabbat Shalom, have a wonderful weekend. And don't forget to join us next week for the continuation of Szarvas Spirit Days. You can check our schedule for August on the website. You can scan our QR code that will take you directly to the website where you can see the days and the times when our activities are going to happen. So it was lovely seeing you all. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Bye-bye.